Welcome back, everyone. I'm Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Jim Teske, and we're getting closer to winter. So we're going to talk to someone that certainly has lots of opinions about winter weather, and he focuses a lot on the Arctic and what the Arctic can mean for winter weather here in the eastern United States. And we're bringing in the Director of Seasonal Forecasting, Dr. Judah COHEN at Atmospheric and Environmental Research. Judah, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Good to have you. Now, give us a little bit of background about yourself and your research and what you do at AER in terms of forecasting.
Yeah, so I study large-scale atmospheric dynamics with a focus on winter, and I'm especially intrigued by trying to improve longer-range forecasting, so beyond 2 weeks. So that has been the focus of my research, certainly the past couple of decades, I would say, and I do try to apply it, that research. I think it's important to, a lot of people claim that their ideas will help make a better forecast, but until you've actually tried it out, it's real hard to know. So I think it's important and so I write a weather blog, and I do put out seasonal forecasting, trying to apply that, research.
Yeah. And what drew you to, the Arctic and the connections there? Is there anything that, in particular that drew you to that part of the world to focus on?
Yeah. So I love snow. I'm a big snow lover. And I want to study snow, try to maybe make a better snowfall forecast, which really isn't part of my research, but I did get an opportunity to come to MIT as a postdoc and study the impacts of snow cover on the large-scale atmospheric dynamics, focusing more on North America. And I would say I still think I'm focused on North American weather, but looking at snow cover in Siberia, and because that's where our research said had the strongest correlation, but the strongest relationship with eastern U.S. winter weather.
Now we will get into that in the second part, but this first part, because this is kind of involved in that process. But I think we need to start kind of with some of the other basics. And first off, talk a little bit about the polar vortex. We talk about it on the air. Give people a sense for what the polar vortex is, and maybe even what the polar vortex is not, because I think sometimes talking about that it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, so just quickly with the snow cover. So, Emma, what was the connection between snow in Siberia and the winter weather in New York State, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So it was the conduit, or the pathway was through the polar vortex, and we found that there's a relation between snow cover and the behavior of the polar vortex. Typically, the polar vortex is strong. And it tends to keep all the cold air bottled over the Arctic, and it tends to be milder here in the mid-latitudes. That includes much of the U.S. But there are times when the polar vortex becomes disrupted, weakened, the circulation becomes distorted, and then the cold air kind of is released from the Arctic and moves south, and warm air rushes into the Arctic to replace that cold air. And the polar vortex is a low-pressure system. It's typically centered over the North Pole. But it's not a hurricane, it's not a tornado. It's really just an area of low pressure, and like all low pressures in the northern hemisphere, the circulation is counterclockwise. So the air spins around from west to east, and when it's strong and mostly circular in shape, so you basically get what meteorologists say zonal flow, very fast zonal flow. The weather moves very quickly across the air, the weather. The polar vortex isn't directly affecting the weather. That's the jet stream. but similar idea. So, the mild air kind of circulates is kept to the south, and the cold air is kind of kept up to the north, kind of acts like a fence.
And I think at this point, I mean, we have to remind people that the polar vortex is not in the troposphere where our weather typically takes place. It's actually the next layer up, correct?
Right. Yeah. So should have mentioned that. Thank you. So there, if you can think of the atmosphere having two layers, the bottom layer is the troposphere, where we have the jet stream and our weather, and then the layer above that is the stratosphere, and that's where the polar vortex is. But I think us climatologists are appreciating more and more that there's a connection between the polar vortex and our weather. They're not kind of unrelated or independent, like kind of phenomena or entities. And I certainly one who advocates that the relationship is stronger or is more involved. The polar vortex is involved with the weather even more than we say or think. Yeah.
And usually when the polar vortex is making headlines, it's usually also associated with a term that's gotten a lot of press in the last few years, and that's sudden stratospheric warming. Now, what is that?
Right. Yeah, so as I mentioned, if you give like the analogy that a polar vortex is like a figure skater, so in its normal strong state, you got a figure skater in a very fast rotation. So that centripetal force pulls everything towards the center of the rotation, so the arms are close to the body. But there are times when that figure skater will stumble and trip, and this rotation will slow down a lot, and the centripetal force is no longer there, so the arms flail out. And same thing with the polar vortex. When it's very fast rotation, the cold air is kept close to the center rotation near the North Pole. And then when it really slows down, that cold air is released and it moves south. And so there's a vacuum created, right? And to fill that void or vacuum, warm air from further south rushes north towards the North Pole. And there's very dramatic warmings that occur in around the North Pole and the Arctic. It can be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit of warming in just a few days, something that absolutely never occurs in the troposphere. And because of this very dramatic warming, it's gotten the kind of label or is identified as sudden stratospheric warmings.
And for people that are watching, it's not like you just throw a switch, you have stratospheric warming, and the next day Arctic air is in the eastern United States. There's a whole process that has to take, and it takes a while, right?
Yeah, and it takes a while. That can be frustrating and complicating, but the good news there is because it could take up to 2 weeks. Let's say on average, people think it takes about 2 weeks. That gives you information or the ability to make longer range forecasts, not what's going to happen the next few days, but maybe the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, which is called subseasonal forecasting. So I do think polar vortex variability in the winter, and a polar vortex only exists in the winter, really the cold months of the year, gives you this ability. You can certainly capitalize on studying the polar vortex, on making better, longer range, these sub-seasonal forecasts, and something I'm pretty involved with.
And I do want to get to. I mean, it doesn't always mean that it's going to drop into the eastern United States. I mean, it can go into Europe. So there's always there's that challenge as well.
Yeah. So when you have a disruption of the polar vortex, it doesn't turn cold everywhere at the same time. There's a lot of regional variability, and that there's variability from event to event. But the feature that is most closely associated with sudden stratospheric warmings in the troposphere now is Greenland blocking, when you have strong high pressure sitting near Greenland. The weather that is most closely related to what's going on in Greenland is European weather. When there's this Greenland block or a strong high pressure over Greenland, it tends to be colder and snowier over Europe. And when there's low pressure over Greenland, it tends to be milder and less snow, wetter in northern Europe anyway. Um, and the same thing does happen in the eastern U.S., certainly, and especially the southeast. But it tends to be colder when you have, and snowier with the Greenland block, milder without the Greenland block. But the relationship is stronger with Europe than it is with the eastern U.S.
Okay. And one other thing before we go to the break here, stratospheric warmings make the headlines a lot, but there are subtle changes that happen with the polar vortex as well. Like last year, we saw a lot of stretched polar vortexes, and how do they manifest themselves?
Yeah, so I think all the attention's been drawn to the sun stratospheric warmings because they're the most dramatic event in the stratosphere, but there are the more subtle events, but can have a very large impact, especially east of the Rockies here in North America. And that's not where there's this very dramatic warming in the Arctic. Sometimes there's not much warming going on at all. But kind of the polar vortex gets squeezed a bit. So, if it's normally kind of a circular shape, it kind of gets stretched out, elongated, maybe pulling on a rubber band. And you kind of get like two lobes of lower pressure, instead of one nice circular lobe over the North Pole, you get one lobe over Asia and another lobe over North America. And under those lobes, there can be very severe weather, cold and snowstorms. We certainly last year was really a great example of that. And why I have really focused the past 5-7 years on these stretch polar vortex events, because unlike sun stratospheric warmings, where the relationship to the weather is strongest across Eurasia and not as strong in the United States, these stretch polar vortex events are really strongly related to our weather here in North America, especially east of the Rockies. I did a study. I was part of this group that we did a study, and stretch polar vortex are the most of the different kind of modes or flavors of polar vortex behavior. Stretch polar vortex are the one that's most closely associated with the most extreme winter weather. That includes, extreme low temperatures and disruptive snowstorms. So certainly for us here in the United States, stretch polar vortex events, they're quick but hard hitting.
Yeah. And one example last year was the snowstorm in the Gulf Coast that they had in January, and that was
I think that was a really classical type of stretch polar vortex event. We saw just unprecedented snow in the deep south along the Gulf Coast in Florida. I mean, places that had maybe as much as 2 inches in their whole history, going back maybe like 150 years, had a foot of snow, and they had all-time record low temperatures. So again, it wasn't long lasting, but it was certainly hard hitting and brought in severe, extreme, very extreme winter weather, especially for places that are really not used to it.
Yeah. So we're going to take a break now. You kind of touched upon the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is snow cover, snowpack in Siberia. So we'll get into that, and a piece of lucky clothing that you have to help with getting snow in your part of the country. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So if you can stick with us, we'll talk a little bit about that coming up in the next segment.
Yes, of course.
Okay, we're back. I'm Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Jim Teske, and we're getting into a discussion on winter weather here. And we've been talking with Dr. Judah Cohen. He's the Seasonal Forecasting Director at Atmospheric and Environmental Research. And I mentioned we're recording this in October. And Judah, one of your things that you really dig into this time of year is what's going on with the snow cover in Siberia. What is that connection? How did you stumble upon that, and how does that play out, the snowpack in Siberia, to what winter can be like in the East?
Yeah, I mean, I got into the field just to study snow. Who knew about the polar vortex? But so I had this research project I was looking at North American snow cover and maybe the impact on our weather. But it turned out my research, and though I collaborated with a few people, it wasn't just myself, saw that the relationship between Eurasian snow cover, mostly Siberian snow cover in October, is strongest with the winter weather here in the eastern United States, right? So it's real. I mean, there's a lot of skepticism to when I first published the research, like how, what does one have to do with the other? There's no obvious connection, and the connection was through the polar vortex. It turned out when you have more snow in Siberia in the fall, October being the key month, the polar vortex tends to be weaker in the following winter. And the eastern United States is very sensitive to the strength of the polar vortex, and then that's how we found this connection. And then on the flip side, you have less snow cover in Siberia. The polar vortex tends to be stronger, and we tend to have a milder winter in the eastern United States. So that it's that kind of a very simple relationship. It has to do with changes in waves in the atmosphere and the energy they gave off. And the polar vortex is really is very strongly influenced by these waves that come kind of filter up or kind of propagate up, bubble up from the troposphere into the stratosphere. More snow cover, bigger waves in the atmosphere, they're more likely to slow down the polar vortex. Less snow cover, smaller waves in the atmosphere, right? Less energy kind of bubbling up from below, and a stronger, more undisturbed circulation of the polar vortex.
So it's almost like a domino effect. It is your kind of theory that, okay, the snow increases, and so that creates a number of things that happen in the atmosphere that does lead to more snow, colder weather in the east.
Absolutely. I call the 6-step process. You start with the first step is the snow cover in Siberia, and it ends with whether we get colder or milder weather. That's the 6th step. So we have quite a few steps that have to, like if you think in football terms, you're making a handoff. Mm-hmm. Those handoffs have to be successful, and plenty of times it gets fumbled, and the whole thing breaks down. So it's not like step 1 to step 2, immediate.
Yeah, you've got to have proper blocking as well.
Yeah, probably. So there's a lot that has to fall into place, and but that gives it the ability to make a longer range forecast because there are these intermediate steps. It takes time, it takes actually months for the whole kind of pathway or dynamic to unfold. So that's why you could use the fall snow cover to predict winter weather.
So I know we're only in the middle of October now, and I'll probably add something here before we get this ready to broadcast. But what do you see right now with that snow cover? How's it going so far the first half of the month?
Yeah, got off to a very fast start. We've kind of had this plateau the past 3-4 October's snow cover is a little bit above normal, but not, I think, enough that was really impactful. Last year was a little more than the previous 3 years. But this year got to a much faster start than certainly the previous 4 years. There's a but.
Yeah.
The weather is not as conducive for it to continue at that pace. So I expect kind of plateauing, maybe some melt back. Not too uncommon. But I don't think it'll be very dramatic. But we were off to really off to the races. Could have been one of the most, in the past 25 years. But I don't think I think we're going to pull back. But I do think it'll be more than the past. Certainly, probably the past 4 October.
So what's most important for that? Is it like the number on October 31st? Is it in terms of snowpack, or how does that work? Is there a certain time of the month?
Take a
monthly average.
I do think the second half of the month is more important than the first half of the month, and that seems somewhat intuitive. But I use a monthly average in making a winter forecast. I don't predict, take just on one particular day or week. Mm-hmm. We've found that the monthly average is the best predictor.
Yeah, I would guess intuitively that the beginning of the month, since it's early in the season, it's more apt to fluctuation just because it's early in the season. Is that a good assumption?
Yeah, but also, again, there has to be carry through. So if you get a lot of snow at the beginning of the month and it just melts off rapidly, that's going to be very disruptive to this whole chain reaction, domino effect that we talked about. But if you get, because the waves in the atmosphere, the key period for the waves in the atmosphere for influencing the polar vortex is November and December, right? You want to build this high pressure over northwest Eurasia. We call it Ural-Scandinavian blocking. So we talked about Greenland blocking earlier. If you're going to get a lot of snow in the late part of the winter and build up this cold air mass, and it's been very cold in Siberia this October, but if that can continue, it's going to moderate. But you build that block, that like that traffic jam in the atmosphere that builds a bigger wave. That in November, December, that's the key period for influencing the polar vortex. So that's why I also know that. I mean, and this continues into November. Some people actually have research showing that it's not really October that's the key month, that it's November. But I stick with October, but I certainly pay attention to November. Yeah. So, I mean, you want to see the follow through. So, again, I think the second half of the month, just intuitively, just or has bigger impact than the early part.
Yeah, so you got to get through all the steps. It's not just the end of October. So you got to see it through. You got to see it through. Now, before
this guy. So typically every year is different, but November, December is important for these waves in the jet stream, and then also the end of December to early January, the energy propagation are kind of bubbling up from the troposphere to stratosphere, and then the polar vortex either strengthens or weakens based on what happened previously.
Okay. Now, before I let you go, you're very active on X, and you live in the Boston area, and I know you're always looking for that big storm. And you have a little ritual that before the storm hits, you wear a particular piece of clothing. Tell the folks about that to get ready for the storm.
Yeah, I'm not sure how. I have this. Well, there was this sweater. I think not many people would find it attractive to buy. It was kind of ugly, but it had big words of snow on it. And so I bought it, and then it turned into my lucky, snow sweater, my piece of clothing that if you want to think of it like superstitious. I try to sway the snow gods to be more favorable for Boston, but also the whole East Coast. I feel like we're kind of camaraderie here. We got kindred spirits. Those of us who really are enthusiastic about seeing snow. Certainly more people seem to hate the snow than love the snow. Trying to give everybody hope and optimism that it's going to work out. I mean, it's so fickle. I mean, you in Syracuse, you have lake effect. You're lucky that it seems like the wind comes the right direction and it snows. Here in Boston, you got to get the cold air, you got to get the storm in the right place.
You need more things going in your direction. Yeah, there's more steps to get snow in Boston than there is here in Syracuse. That's Absolutely. For sure. Yeah, well, for folks that do want to follow Judah and his musings about the winter weather, he's on X at Judah47. I highly encourage a follow of that. I've learned a lot by reading your blogs. I know where the Barents Sea is now because of your.
We didn't talk about Arctic sea ice, but that's also favorable for disrupting the polar vortex and actually sun and stratospheric warming is more than the stretch polar vortex. So we'll see. Yeah.
So if it ever comes up in jeopardy, I know where the Barents Sea is now because of your blogs.
Yes, thank you. It is important. I mean, I know it's an area that people don't think about normally, but we're kind of joking about it right now, but it is north of Scandinavia. For people that are wondering, he's talking about where is it? Northern Russia, Northwest Russia, Scandinavia, Northwest Russia, that area.
Yeah. That's where you live with your research in the Arctic, is places like the Barents Sea and things like that. Well, Dr. Judah Cohen, we want to thank you for being with us. I could have gone for another half hour, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. You don't have to ask me twice to talk about this stuff. I love it. Anybody who's willing to listen, I'll tell you about it.
Okay. Thanks again, Judah.
All right, thank you.